Welcome to HD Rare Coins, your ultimate source for rare coins, fascinating history, and the thrill of discovery. From legendary pennies to hidden gems, we explore the world of numismatics one amazing coin at a time. Not just in America, but in its very money, the price of silver had climbed. Too high. Too fast. Treasury reserves were thinning, and people, average citizens, not just investors, were hoarding coins. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. Because for the first time in generations, the metal in their change was worth more than the face printed on it: dimes, quarters, $50, all of them quietly disappearing from drawers, jars, wallets, and purses. Pulled aside. Saved. Melted down by the greedy and the wise alike, and so the US government made a decision that would ripple through time and shake the very heart of collecting. Silver would end, and a new coin, stripped of its shine but forged in the heat of economic necessity, would take its place, the 1965 quarter. To the untrained eye, it looked nearly identical to its silver predecessor. Washington's solemn face. Liberty arching above. In God we trust etched like a whisper across the left. And on the back, the eagle, wings spread in sharp defiance, clutching arrows as though America herself wasn't quite done fighting yet. But underneath the familiar surface, everything had changed. No more 90% silver. No more precious metal. Now, it was clad. A copper core wrapped in nickel. Tougher, cheaper, modern. And to many, less special, but what the public didn't know, what even the mint barely understood, was that the 1965 quarter was no ordinary coin. It was born in chaos, struck during a time of confusion and transition. A time when the lines between silver and clad blurred. When dies meant for one composition were sometimes used on another. When blank planchets were mixed, mismatched, misfed. And when those rare mistakes escaped into circulation, they carried with them stories that would take decades to surface. One of those stories began in Vermont. In 1982, a man named Wallace Briggs found a strange quarter in a leather change purse left behind by his late aunt. At first glance, it looked normal. Worn. Slightly discolored. But heavier than expected. He weighed it was off. A local coin shop ran tests. It wasn't copper-nickel. It was silver. A 1965 quarter struck on a 90% silver planchet, something that was not supposed to exist. The mint had officially stopped using silver for quarters in 1964. But evidently, a leftover blank had made it into the presses. Somehow, some way, it had escaped, and now, it was real, authenticated. Certified, sold at auction $4.46,000. That coin was the first, but not the last. Others surfaced. More 1965 quarters struck on silver planchets. Not many, less than 2 dozen verified to date. Each with the same story, born of confusion. Raised in shadows. Released by mistake. And valued now like relics of a world that vanished without warning. The 1965 quarter became a riddle. A symbol. A lesson in what happens when history collides with metal. There are stories you hear whispered at coin shows. Tales passed from dealer to collector, from auctioneer to archivist. And one of them begins late one night inside the Philadelphia Mint. It was the spring of 1966. The new clad quarters had been striking for months. The machinery was still settling into its rhythm, replacing years of silver striking tradition with the hard new clank of copper and nickel. Workers were instructed to double-check everything. Inspect planchets. Review die states. Watch for rejects. But that night, under fluorescent lights and quiet hums, something slipped. A worker, name never recorded, noticed a sound that was slightly different. A sharper tone. A ring not quite like the others. He paused. Reached into the reject bin. Pulled out a quarter that didn't match the rest. Not by sight. By feel. By sound. He tapped it against a steel table. The chime was unmistakable, silver. The coin bore the 1965 date. No mint mark, just like every quarter from that year. But it was silver. It shimmered in a way the others didn't. The edge, when examined closely, lacked the telltale copper streak of the clad sandwich. No one said a word, not officially, but some say that worker kept the coin. Some say he brought it home, stored it in a hollowed-out Bible, and never spent it. Others believe he sold it quietly, years later, to a private collector who only revealed it on his deathbed. That coin now resides in a velvet-lined box in Northern California, and though it's never been publicly auctioned, experts estimate its worth at over $62,000. And it wasn't alone. As the years passed, more errors began to surface, some were dramatic. Like the double-struck 1965 quarter, discovered in a batch of old casino coins in Nevada. The obverse bore two impressions of Washington's profile, overlapping like a ghost stepping out of its own body. The reverse was equally distorted, eagle wings blurred mid-flight, the motto E pluribus unum smeared like a secret being erased. It was clear, the coin had slipped during striking, been hit again, and somehow made it out into the world. Graded MS 66 by NGC, auctioned $4.41, $2.50. Others were subtle, but no less shocking. In a rural Wisconsin attic, sealed in a plastic bank bag marked, "Do not open until retirement," sat a hoard of uncirculated 1965 quarters. The man who opened it in 2003 found something odd, not in the coins themselves, but in the consistency. Every quarter gleamed. No wear. But 4 of them were heavier. Sharper. And when tested, revealed something wild. They were transitional errors. 1965 dated quarters struck using leftover 1964 silver planchets. All 4 from the same bag. All struck at the height of the mint's chaotic switch from silver to clad. The bag had protected them for nearly 40 years, and now, together, the 4 coins sold at a private auction $4.228,000. But perhaps the most unusual story came from a small-town museum in Arkansas, where an exhibit of 1960s memorabilia included a case showing a 1964 Kennedy half-dollar. Or so it seemed, until a young collector noticed something strange. A coin appeared to be wedged into the edge of the half-dollar, barely visible under the plastic rim of the case. A closer look revealed it wasn't 2 coins pressed together. It was one solid fused planchet, with the outer design of a 1965 quarter partially overstruck on top of a 1964 half. Mint experts were called. Speculation ran wild. The best theory: a misfed silver half-dollar planchet was accidentally struck with quarter dies during an experimental setup. A planchet too large, too thick, and yet somehow accepted. A multi-denomination, dual-year strike point, one of the rarest known mint malfunctions in history. Estimated value: over $400,000, if it ever sells, because the owner, he kept it, said it belonged to his grandfather, said it was too strange, too beautiful, too impossible to let go, and so the legend of the 1965 quarter continued. A coin born from necessity. A coin dismissed as plain, but the deeper you looked, the more it transformed into a vessel of secrets, of rare errors, of silver ghosts and mechanical accidents. His name was Jacob Lindsay. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. But in numismatic circles, his name eventually became legend. Because in 1992, he made a decision most people would consider strange: he would collect only 1 coin. 1 year. 1 denomination, the 1965 quarter. People laughed at him. Called it a beginner's choice. Told him there was nothing special about a clad quarter from the mid-60s. But Jacob saw what others missed. He saw the chaos of a minting transition, the opportunity in overlooked details, and the thrill of chasing perfection in the plain. And so, he began. He searched rolls from banks, hunted flea markets, bought bulk lots, and attended coin shows with a jeweler's loop in one pocket and a checklist in the other. Over the years, his collection grew, not in size, but in precision. He hunted for the sharpest strikes, the rarest die varieties, the elusive full torch reverse he believed was possible, even if no grading service had ever certified one. Then one day, in 2004, he found it. A coin so crisp, so flawless, so mirror-smooth in its fields that even the harshest graders took pause. The strike was full, every line of the eagle's wings defined, Washington's profile sculpted as if it were proof. The edge was clean, and, most shockingly, the coin carried full mint luster with 0 contact marks. Graded MS 68 plus PL, registry number 1 of its kind. Jacob cried when he got it back, not because of its value, though collectors whispered it might fetch $85,000 to $100,000, but because it proved he wasn't wrong. That there was beauty in what everyone else thought was ordinary, that he never sold it. The coin remains with his daughter now, displayed under glass, alongside the handwritten notebook where Jacob logged every 1965 quarter he ever found, but not all 1965 quarters stayed in safe places. In 2011, rescue divers in Michigan recovered a car that had been submerged in the river since 1973. Inside, a rusted seatbelt, a leather wallet, and in the center console, a cigar box, sealed with tape. When opened, it revealed a handful of coins stuck together by decades of cold water and silence. Most were ruined, except one, a single 1965 quarter, somehow untouched. Protected from corrosion by the leather lining and pressure of the box. When cleaned and examined, it showed unusual mirror surfaces, likely from early dye use before the dyes wore down from production stress. PCGS labeled at mint state 67 proof. No one could explain how a coin that sat underwater for almost 4 decades could look so fresh, but there it was. A coin born from chaos, protected by fate. It sold at auction $4.73,000. Then there's the story of the mint tour theft. It happened in 1965, shortly after the clad quarters went into mass production. The Mint in Philadelphia was hosting press and government officials to reassure the public that despite the change in composition, quality control was strong, but the truth was more complicated. During one of the tours, an unassuming guest was seen. The air in 1974 felt different. The nation was caught in a whirlwind of doubt and change. The Watergate scandal tightened its grip on headlines. President Nixon was under fire. Americans were anxious, watching a political drama unfold in real time while inflation began to stretch wallets thinner than ever before. The trust in leadership was crumbling, and so was confidence in the economy, but even in uncertain times, one machine never stopped moving: the presses at the U.S. Mint. Coins kept flowing, and among them came the 1974 quarter. A coin nobody looked at twice back then. Just another in a long line of Washington quarters. Familiar face. Sharp eagle on the reverse. A quick shimmer before it disappeared into a pocket or vending machine. But what most people didn't realize at the time was that the 1974 quarter wasn't just currency, it was born at a tipping point in American numismatics. It was a coin of precision, and accidents. Of transition, and secrets. Of rumors that would one day be confirmed by discoveries made in attic boxes, old coat pockets, and dusty coin albums stored away for decades. The official composition hadn't changed, it was still copper-nickel clad, like the quarters minted since 1965. But what had changed was the mint's approach. The Philadelphia and Denver mints were ramping up production fast, trying to meet the growing demand for circulating coinage. San Francisco, once again, focused on proof sets, but even there, anomalies would occur, and what began as routine soon turned into mystery. Somewhere in Michigan, a retired teacher named Gerald opened an old cigar box he'd inherited from his uncle. Inside was a roll of 1,974 quarters, still sealed, still crisp. But one coin at the top had a strange glint. Different tone. Slightly softer edges. When weighed, it came in heavier than the rest. Not by much, but enough. Curious, he sent it for testing. The verdict stunned him. The coin had been struck on a leftover silver planchet. How? No one could say for sure. Officially, silver quarters had stopped a decade prior. But every now and then, old planchets re-entered the system, by mistake, or by design. And this one had found its way into a 1974 production line. PCGS certified the coin, graded MS-65. Auction $4/$68,000. From that moment, the 1974 quarter was no longer just another clad coin. Collectors began searching with renewed interest. Not just for silver planchets, but for doubling. For misstrikes. For full strike details that could elevate a common coin into something magnificent. Somewhere in California, a teenage boy digging through his father's coin jars spotted what he thought was an off-center coin. A 1974 D quarter, with Washington's profile shifted dramatically to the left, rim almost cut. A rare, dramatic off-center strike. He thought it was cool, nothing more, but that same coin, sold years later through Stack's Bowers, would pull in $31,500. Because 1974 was full of such ghosts, mint workers were under pressure. Dies ran longer. Quality control was uneven. And that perfect storm created rarity. Value. Mystery.it started with a coin show in Des Moines. Not a large one, just rows of folding tables in a community center, buzzing with quiet negotiation and soft murmurs of collectors flipping through binders. And there, in the corner, sat an older man named Leon, hunched behind a table with 3 velvet trays. And the last tray was a 1974 quarter that didn't match any known listing. It wasn't the shine. It wasn't even the strike. It was the lettering. On closer inspection, the word Liberty appeared to show thickness at the base of each letter, almost as if the die had been slightly doubled, but not across the entire surface. Just the bottom stems. A collector snapped it up for $12, not realizing what he held. That same coin would later be confirmed as a previously undocumented double die obverse, one of the rarest known from that year. PCGS added it to their database as Variety FS-101. It sold at auction for $29,000 in 2015. What makes a double die like that so valuable isn't just rarity, it's how close it comes to being completely overlooked. Coins like these hide in plain sight for decades. Not flashy. Not famous. Until someone, somewhere, holds it under the right light at the right angle and sees what the mint didn't. But 1974 quarters didn't just harbor double dies, they held something more unsettling. Somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, a woman going through her late brother's belongings discovered a coin album marked, "Do Not Sell." Inside were assorted coins, but nestled between 2 cardboard flips was a piece that made her stop breathing. A 1974 quarter, except it wasn't struck on clad metal, and it wasn't silver either. It was aluminum, lighter than air, bright as dawn. The quarter made a soft ping when tapped. At first, she assumed it was fake, some novelty token or private mint fantasy piece. But a metallurgical test confirmed it was real. The coin had somehow been struck on an aluminum planchet. Whether it was an experimental piece from the mint, or a mistake involving leftover blanks from the controversial 1974 aluminum cent project, no one could say. But its legitimacy was never questioned again. It became known as the ghost quarter. Its estimated value, over $250,000, but it never made it to public auction. The woman donated it to the ANA Museum, in honor of her brother, a quiet numismatist who had seen beauty in the mundane. Then came the incident at the Denver Mint. Rumors had circulated for years that in late 1974, a few high-pressure proof-like strikes had been accidentally produced using new dies meant for testing coin longevity. These coins, although never intended for circulation, were said to have slipped out during night shifts, possibly taken by employees or tossed into bags during routine sorting. No one could prove it, until one appeared in Montana, in a small estate sale. A 1974 quarter with full mirror fields, cameo contrast, and razor-sharp details on both the obverse and reverse. The coin seemed to radiate under light, far beyond what normal circulation strikes ever achieved. Graded MS 68 PL by NGC. It caused a stir across the collecting world, because if one made it out, there could be more. Collectors began searching change with magnifiers. Dealers started revisiting bulk bags long since forgotten in back rooms and basements. Treasure, hidden in plain sight, waiting for hands willing to search. And then there was the double denomination error. A coin that should not exist, and yet does. It was discovered by a coin dealer in Ohio, who noticed something strange about the edge of a quarter he was about to dismiss. At a glance, it was a 1974 quarter, until he looked closer and saw traces of Lincoln's head. Faint, buried beneath Washington's design, as if the two men had somehow shared the same canvas. The coin had been struck on a 1-cent planchet that had already been partially struck with a Lincoln cent design, then overstruck, hard, by quarter dies. The result, a Frankenstein of U.S. coinage. 2 denominations. 2 designs. 2 stories. 1 coin. It went to auction under armed security. Final hammer price, $187,000. And as these stories grew, so did the fascination. The 1974 quarter had been minted by the millions. Sent into soda machines, laundromats, arcade cabinets. Forgotten. Ignored. Tossed into glove compartments and couch cushions. But now? Now it was being hunted. Obsessed over. Revered, because the difference between a 25-cent piece and a $250,000 legend often comes down to a sliver of metal, a single decision, or a fleeting mistake on a quiet night at the mint. The year was 2007. A contractor in Missouri was renovating an old federal post office building that had been shut down since the mid-80s. Most of the rooms were empty, dust-choked, long forgotten, filled with brittle paper and echoing silence. But in the lowest level, behind a rusted steel cabinet bolted to the concrete wall, he found a small, unmarked wooden crate. Inside, coins, hundreds of them, neatly stacked in plastic tubes, each roll wrapped in official U.S. Mint paper. But what made this crate different was what lay beneath the first layer. A sheet, a flat, uncut sheet, of proof coins, with 1,974 quarters in each window. The coins were sealed under a hardened film, designed to protect them from oxygen exposure. But these weren't just regular proof coins, they were different. One in particular caught the contractor's eye. It was a 1974 quarter with an S mint mark, struck in full-proof brilliance, but on closer inspection, the mint mark appeared doubled and oddly shaped. Experts later confirmed it as a previously undocumented S/S repunched mint mark variety. The doubling was crisp, centered, and perfectly preserved in proof condition. The discovery launched a frenzy. Why was a mint sheet stored in a post office? Was it confiscated? Forgotten? Part of a government distribution that never happened? No records exist. The sheet was broken apart, the coins slabbed individually. That S/S quarter sold for $54,000, the first and only example known, but the most bizarre chapter in the 1974 quarter's history came out of New York in 2014, when an international art forgery ring was taken down by the FBI. Among the counterfeit paintings, rare books, and altered documents, agents found a 1974 quarter. At first, they ignored it, until a sharp-eyed agent noticed it had reading that didn't match any known U.S. issue, narrower ridges, slightly compressed edges, and unusual where that wasn't consistent with circulation. The coin was examined by a numismatic expert from the Smithsonian. The verdict: the quarter had been used as a microfilm container, carefully hollowed out, reassembled with surgical precision, and disguised to look like an average pocket coin. Inside, once opened with a hidden pin, was a fragment of archival quality film, containing blueprints for a forged certificate of authenticity. There's something quiet about the 1990s, before smartphones, before Wi-Fi, before everything in life was tracked, scanned, and streamed. It was a decade that still felt analog, even as the digital future knocked on every door. People still carried spare change in their pockets. They fed quarters into payphones, car washes, laundromats. A quarter wasn't just currency, it was a tool, a ticket, a link to everyday life. And in 1992, the quarter kept its familiar face, George Washington, profile etched in nickel, stoic and timeless. But what if something was off? What if that same quarter, taken for granted by millions, hid a truth no one saw coming? That was the mystery waiting to be unraveled. In 1992, the U.S. Mint produced hundreds of millions of quarters. From Philadelphia. From Denver. Their metal blend was copper-nickel. Their design unchanged. Their role functional. Forgettable. Until one surfaced with a secret. It was found in Arizona, inside a small bag of junk silver at a coin shop estate sale. A teenager flipping through coins for fun spotted it. It gleamed differently. Not just from wear, but from the way it caught the light. When weighed, it didn't match its clad companions. It was heavier. He thought the scale was broken. It wasn't. What he held in his palm was a quarter unlike the others. Further tests revealed the shocking truth: it had been struck on a 90% silver planchet, a leftover ghost from a time that should have long been buried. How it got into 1992 circulation, no one at the Mint could explain. Some suspected it had been a misplaced blank from the 1992 silver proof set. Others whispered theories of rogue planchets or an inside job. But what mattered was the coin existed, and once confirmed, its value soared. It was graded MS-67 by PCGS. The surfaces were clean. The strike was strong. It was one of only 3 known to exist. When it finally reached auction, under blazing lights and the hum of bidders' breaths, it sold for $112,000 all for a coin everyone else would have used to buy a soda. That discovery triggered a new wave of quarter hunters. Collectors, dealers, and amateurs alike began scouring their old coin jars, hoping to uncover more anomalies. And slowly, one by one, more stories began to surface. Not all of them were silver. Some were far stranger. In Florida, a man at a flea market bought a box of tokens for $5. Inside, mixed among foreign coins and arcade slugs, was what appeared to be a regular 1992 quarter. But the obverse, the front, was off-center, almost entirely. Washington's face was cut off at the chin. The reverse was similarly shifted, but still within the rims. It wasn't just any misstrike. It was a near-perfect off-center error, combined with a die rotation of 20 degrees, an exceptionally rare minting anomaly. PCGS certified it with the notation dual error, rotation/off-center. Estimated value $14,800. In Chicago, a collector came across a quarter with a weak strike and blobby lettering. At first glance, it looked damaged. But under magnification, it revealed a bold die clash, where the dies struck each other without a planchet between them, imprinting parts of the reverse onto the obverse. A dramatic minting flaw, visible to the naked eye. Only a few such 1992 quarters are known to exist with this level of detail. The value climbed. The hunt intensified. Meanwhile, in a sleepy New Hampshire suburb, a boy named Caleb cracked open his grandfather's toolbox, looking for batteries. Inside, beneath screws and old nails, was a tiny plastic box marked mint mistake. In it, a single 1992 quarter. At first glance, it seemed normal, until you realized the entire coin was blank on one side, a struck-through capped die error. The obverse die had failed, and what should have been George Washington's face was smooth as glass. That coin eventually found its way to a grading service, the final grade. MS-65. The error? One of a kind that IT sold privately for $$27,000. And then came the whispers, about something even rarer. A 1992 quarter with no mint mark, not struck in Philadelphia. Not Denver. No letter at all. A ghost coin. Experts debated its origin. Some speculated it was struck from an experimental die. Others thought it could have come from a damaged hub. Whatever the case, the coin had no visible mint mark but matched every other feature of the known 1992 strike. It was never confirmed as an official release, but when it was listed anonymously on an online numismatic forum, it sparked chaos. Offers poured in. One collector from Japan offered $42,000 for its sight unseen. The seller declined that. He said he'd rather keep it. Said it was too special to let go. This was the kind of obsession the 1992 quarter inspired, not because of its fame, but because of its forgotten status. Because it was unassuming. Hidden. And yet, within its ranks, there were miracles. Minting errors. Silver stowaways. Coins that never should have existed. And all of them carried stories no press could predict. In the quiet town of Henderson, Nevada, a retired coin dealer named Walt decided to clear out his storage unit. He'd run a small storefront in the 1980s and early 90s, nothing fancy, just a glass counter and a slow trickle of loyal customers. When he retired, he boxed up everything. Display trays, loose coins, unsold rolls. They sat in darkness for nearly 2 decades. Until one spring afternoon, with dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight through the metal door, he cracked open a box labeled 1992 bulk. Inside were 5 mint-sealed canvas bags. Each held 1,000 quarters, untouched since the day they were shipped from the Denver Mint. Most would expect the same, ordinary strikes, mass-produced, standard-clad, but Walt, by habit, examined each coin before releasing them for sale, and then he found it. A 1992 quarter with a reverse unlike anything he'd seen. Not just a different tone, not just deeper grooves, but a totally mirror-like field with frosted devices. It looked like a proof, but it wasn't struck in San Francisco. And it wasn't in a proof set. It had come out of a bag intended for general circulation. This was a unicorn, a business strike quarter with proof-like qualities, known to collectors as PLs. Not common. Not even rare. Virtually unheard of from Denver in 1992. PCGS gave it a grade of MS 68 PL.IT later sold for $23,000, breaking records for a modern quarter of that condition, but that wasn't the only anomaly in the bag's. 3 rolls later, Walt found another piece that stopped him cold. A coin that appeared to have 2 reverses. At first, he thought it was a magician's coin, a novelty or altered fake. But the weight was correct. The edges were natural. The surfaces pristine. One side bore the typical eagle. The other, a mirrored, slightly rotated version of the reverse design. Washington's face was nowhere to be seen. It was, without doubt, a double reverse strike. Numismatists were baffled. Die alignment made it almost impossible. For 2 reverse dies to be in use at the same time required a catastrophic failure, or an intentional test that somehow escaped the mint floor. Regardless, the piece became a numismatic legend. NGC called it a double reverse mule error. The valuation, $86,000, and climbing. Meanwhile, in rural Vermont, a man renovating his late uncle's barn found a green metal ammunition box behind a collapsed shelf. Inside was a hoard of modern coins, most unremarkable. But beneath them, carefully wrapped in newspaper from 1993, lay a set of 1992 San Francisco proof quarters, sealed in cellophane. One caught his eye. The S mint mark looked crooked. Under magnification, it wasn't just crooked, it was doubled. Clear, crisp, and unmistakable. The S leapt from the field with a ghost-like twin. He discovered a 1992 S repunched mint mark (RPM) proof quarter, previously undocumented. When PCGS listed it, the forums exploded. Collectors began tearing through 1992 S proof sets in search of similar coins. Some found light doubling, but none matched the clarity of the first. It became known as the Windsor S/S proof, named after the town where it was discovered. It changed hands for $14,200 in a private auction, but not every legend starts in dusty barns or old dealer lots. Sometimes, the spark comes from children. In a town just outside Pittsburgh, a 10-year-old girl named Layla brought a bag of coins to school for a class project on American currency. Among her assortment was a 1992 quarter that her grandfather had given her. When the teacher, a former coin enthusiast, looked at it under the classroom magnifier, she froze. The quarter had an inverted date. Instead of reading 1992, the last digit curled awkwardly upward, as though stamped upside down. The 2 appeared malformed, oddly looped. It wasn't damage. It was die variety. A defect in the number punch, a known phenomenon, but incredibly rare in this year. It became known as the Layla Curled 2 variety. The coin community rallied around it, not just for its rarity, but for the story behind it. A little girl unknowingly bringing a $9,000 rarity to school in a Ziploc bag, and as more of these stories piled up, something became increasingly clear. The 1992 quarter wasn't just another mid-series release. It was a time capsule. A coin that captured a moment between 2 eras. The last breath of pre-internet America. The last few years before massive overhauls to U.S. coinage began. And in that narrow window of time, the mint was shifting, experimenting, adjusting quietly behind the scenes, leaving behind pieces that now tell stories far greater than their face value.